Hi, welcome. Today we're going to be talking about viruses and bacteria and how they reproduce and how they co-evolve to work with humans. So first off, viruses and bacteria, they are common in that they are both grouped as pathogens, meaning that they can cause human disease. So our goals for today and what we want to learn is we want to learn about how they reproduce or replicate, basically the mechanism, and we want to look at how they evolve with humans. So what are the selective pressures set up by humans? How do they cause this stuff to happen? So we'll go ahead and start off with viruses. So right off the bat, we know that viruses are non-living. They need a host, and in that sense, they're a parasite. They come in different shapes and forms. So the one that a lot of people are familiar with is this guy. The bacteriophage. They come in different shapes and forms. Because they need a host, they have mechanisms for getting in to a bacteria and causing two forms. They replicate either in a lysogenic or a lytic phase, where one is they remain dormant versus causing an explosion. So how are these influenced by humans? Since they either have a DNA or RNA core, they can rapidly mutate and change. One of the quick ways they can do that is through an enzyme called reverse transcriptase. And this enzyme, recall an enzyme is a protein that can build or break. Reverse transcriptase acts, this is the really common one in AIDS. It's a retrovirus. So a retrovirus means it works backwards from the central dogma. So you might want to recall what the central dogma is. So if you don't remember what the central dogma is, this would be a good time to look it up. But the central dogma basically says DNA goes to RNA to protein. And retroviruses work where they hijack the system and they're able to use their RNA and go back to a DNA that is put back into a host cell. So what does this mean for humans? Human disease is difficult to treat viruses. So what are some common diseases caused by viruses? Things like the cold, AIDS, and other viruses make it difficult to treat. That's because they're always mutating and changing. And change. There's also no treatment. Since it's not alive, you cannot use antibiotics. So that was the virus. So wrapping up the virus, quick summary. Viruses come in different shapes. They need a host. They work through the lytic or lysogenic cycle. And they're not good for humans because they mutate rapidly. So they're difficult to treat. Okay, So now moving on to bacteria. So bacteria also come in different shapes. That's what they're named for. Rods, circles. So rods, circles. They're also named for their form. So if they're clumped or paired. So you may have heard of something called Diplococcus, meaning they're come in pairs and they're round. Streptococcus, those are all forms of bacteria. And bacteria, the thing about them is they reproduce rapidly. While humans are able to evolve in response to bacteria, bacteria are reproducing rapidly. We're talking millions on a dish. We even have our own fauna, or microbiome, within our stomach, in our small intestines that come from bacteria. So bacteria can be good and bad, but the idea is that they reproduce rapidly, extremely quick. And how do they do that? They do that through a process called binary fission. So they have an asexual part. Asexual reproduction, meaning they can make clones. They also have a form of reproduction or gene exchange called conjugation. And this is the idea that allows bacteria to, in some case, reproduce sexually. In some sense, you'd think of it as reproduction. They're able to exchange genes, and these tend to be really common with antibiotics. And that's why we're talking about them now, because you can have examples of antibiotic-resistant MRSA, that's antibiotic. We've also had some forms of gonorrhea that are no longer treatable with antibiotics. And that's because of this gene exchange. So we've kind of touched on shapes of bacteria and how we treat them and how they reproduce, but the main thing that we use is antibiotics. And antibiotics can attack the bacteria at different areas, specifically their cell wall, and they can also prevent reproduction. They can prevent binary fission. So we have antibiotics as a way to kind of control bacteria. So we covered kind of bacteria and virus, just a really brief overview, but I also wanted to hit on why we're even talking about them in evolution. We're talking about them in evolution because they're a great example of coevolution. So if you recall, or through the notes, coevolution is two organisms acting in response to each other. So examples that you might have thought of before are bees and flowers. And a lot of predator-prey relationships are based on this. You might have learned about the idea that you have to keep running in order to stay put, the Red Queen hypothesis. And this fits exactly with that. Humans all the time are trying to beat out diseases, and you could see them a lot with ideas like vaccines. And it's an idea that a lot of Hollywood even preys on with movies like Contagion, and to some extent I Am Legend, which talk about this idea that we are unable to deal with bacteria and viruses on a larger scale. So to just wrap up, I wanted to summarize what we covered. We basically talked about bacteria and viruses, some key features. We also covered on their reproductive mechanism. And more importantly, I wanted to bring up the idea of coevolution. And I'll go ahead and attach some videos that you can see kind of this coevolution, this idea that both humans and these pathogens are locked in an evolutionary arms race. So hopefully you learn a little bit more about bacteria and virus and a little bit about coevolution. So I look forward to talking to you soon. And if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email, give me a call. Hope you have a great one. Take care.